it started. Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2020 InfoSecon. I'm right here. We have Chris Maroun and Mike Bycat. I am Majid Houston, your moderator here, and I'm just going to read a little bit from Chris's bio just to get this thing started up for you guys. All right, Chris is the global solution engineering director of emerging technologies and is responsible for the strategies for all products that reside in emerging technologies, subset of the CyberArk portfolio. His daily responsibilities include defining and continuing to improve the how to knowledge the solution engineering team needs to ensure customers and partners receive the most information about these solutions in a way that is easily consumable. With over 15 years of privileged security experience, he has successfully identified and implemented solutions that have helped secure the critical infrastructure of many of the world's largest companies. This is Chris Maroun and Mike Bycat.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Appreciate everybody's time today. I know everybody's probably working from home or somewhere of the like. So we're going to take a little less than an hour of your time and go through a little bit of a presentation on some of the things that Mike and I and CyberArk in general have experienced over the past several months in dealing with some of the realities that are really setting in. So I'm going to share up my screen here and we're going to get started with our presentation. Again, my name's Chris Maroun. Mike is one of our senior solutions engineer. He's out of Atlanta. He does have power, which is good. He just like Raleigh, we got hit with a little bit of the wind, but I think they got it a little bit worse than we did. But Mike and I have been involved with CyberArk on a number of different levels and a lot of different technologies across our portfolio. And just like everybody else, we're having to figure out the new way to work from home and what some of the different types of attacks are. But we are normal guys, just like the rest of us. We do like to dress up and get in front of customers, but in the times that we have today, obviously that's always a little bit different. So we've got to figure out some different scenarios. So I'm going to start off with just a little bit about some facts, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to go through a little bit of the presentation, and then he's going to turn it back over to me to talk a little bit more. So some of the facts that are pretty interesting. So these percentages, kind of strike me from one of our partners, which is Verizon. They kind of put these facts on their main kind of breach site in regards to just some of the data. And we can see, 70% of breaches were caused by outsiders. That's not a shocking number. I think it's pretty understanding that not a lot of employees are disgruntled. And these outsiders are always trying to figure out a different way in. And so 86% of them were financially motivated. Well, I can't think of any other reason why a breach would be motivated other than just trying to figure out whether or not you can hack into somebody. And those are probably your middle schoolers or early high schoolers just trying to see if they can break something. But what we're going to focus on more specifically is going to be these last two percentages. And I think Mike and I in our presentation are going to kind of take you down the path of a few different ways of how web applications have been kind of the source or the main entry point for a breach, and how misconfigurations of those types of things are really crucial in allowing these attackers to gain the controls that they need. And then 27% of malware incidents, are attributed to ransomware. And this is not a shocking number. As a matter of fact, I would think it would be a lot higher than that, just because of all the media that we see and some of the events that have taken away some of our controls, like being able to have GPS numbers on a boat in the ocean, or being able to tell your friends how many miles you ran every single day, or just, kind of some of the nature of the beast when it comes to ransomware attacks that we've heard of recently. Privileges everywhere, right? As we kind of like start to look at how these different environments are growing. When I first started at CyberArk, or really in this industry, our primary focus was on just the box in the bottom left-hand corner, which is the on-prem environment. And even that has grown to an extent into multiple different realms of containers and DevOps and that type of thing on-prem. But looking at where these privileged users they now are applications and robots, and they're touching IaaS and PaaS and and SaaS applications. And we're talking about 15 years of evolution here is not a lot of time, but privileges everywhere, which opens the door for all of these attackers to start figuring out where these little pinpoints are for them to kind of get in. So what Mike and I are going to do is we're going to spend the next several minutes kind of talking about 4 different topics. And the first one is going to be the right privilege and just in time. Of course, we talked about that 27% number being ransomware focused and that type of thing. And so Mike is going to talk a little bit about least privilege, but doing it the right way and entering a least privilege program, with the right things in mind first, as well as a little bit of just in time. How do I get a user the access that they need? And I'm not going to spoil his surprise there, but he's going to run you through an attack, which is kind of cool. We're going to expand into some remote vendors and making sure that how can we influence the posture of those security platform programs in those outside remote vendors. And if we can't, what can we do about it? Can we expand into forcing them into a different way versus giving them a user ID and password and VPNs? And again, I'm not going to spoil Mike's thunder when it comes to presenting on that angle. Then we're going to take it to a different access point of privilege. As we've seen, privilege is really starting to stretch beyond just the normal IT admin, right? Business users have privileges too. And so we're going to talk about some solutions and some pathways that we need to protect in that angle. And then we'll wrap it up with securing the modern cloud workload. And there's a new product. You guys are going to get first view of it. The GA is actually going to be on November the 9th. But we're going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek today at the very end, and then we'll wrap it up just in time for your next session. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike now, who's going to take the reins really quickly and kind of get us through the first part of the presentation, and then we'll move into the other topics. So Mike, the ball is yours, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Can you check to make sure you see my screen now?
All is good, my friend.
Perfect. And I always tease Chris on this part. He talked about what that small percentage of non-financially motivated attacks must be. And I think he's speaking from experience when he said it must be middle schoolers and people up to no good. So he probably has some insight there for an offline conversation. So nice to meet everybody. As Chris mentioned, based out of Atlanta here, and hopefully he didn't jinx me talking about my power still being on. So I'll be focusing on the top 2 items as Chris mentioned, and we're going to jump in here with this great slide that talks about the privileged pathway. And so when we talk about these attackers, whether they're financially motivated or not, these attacks need to start somewhere, and we might have the tendency to really focus on our highest privileged environments, our security, the areas that we want to focus on the most, like our domain controllers, our databases, where the highest privileged data might live. That's where you're going to default to. But sometimes that's not the easiest way for an attacker to get into your environment. That's where the firewalls are going to be, your IDSs are. So why start with that when you could start with the workstation? So the first cog in our wheel here, as we see, is the workstation and allowing them to steal an admin password. And the slide says the pathway to the domain controller, but I would say this is really the pathway to fill in the blank, because once they're on this workstation and they're able to move through this path, they can really move wherever they need to go inside your environment until they hit that critical asset. So that's really clear and critical to keep in mind. So I'll be focusing on the workstation today as that entry point. And so what would that look like from an attacker perspective? Well, first, of course, we have to have the bad guy in the hoodie. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a legitimate attack for us to discuss. And once we get past that, we think somebody's clicked something on their machine. They open an attachment they shouldn't have. I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like in just a moment. But they're going to look for something that they can attack that will have credentials within it. They want to dump some credentials credentials and utilize that to move through that attack path. We have some icons here, and for a good reason. I use the Chrome as my example with this, in that there is, when you log into a website with credentials in Chrome, you will by default be prompted whether you want to store those credentials. Those credentials have to be stored somewhere, and a lot of times someone's reusing a password, even if they know that's bad practice, and that credential is stored in the Google credential file. Using some open source software, an attacker can easily decrypt that and find out what that credential is, and now they have that pathway to a domain controller or a database server with that highly secure credential that was in there. This could be FileZilla or any type of application running on that workstation that can store the credential. And so we need to protect that endpoint and stop and contain the attack on that endpoint. Sorry for repeating myself there. But how can we do that? With Endpoint Privilege Manager from the CyberArk solution, we have out-of-the-box default policies that will allow you to not only detect when a bad guy has tried to attack those credential stores, but we can also block them from happening. So rather than being reactive to an alert, which we can certainly send out, why not be proactive and prevent the attack from taking place altogether? And so we're going to jump into that with a ransomware protection. But before we get to that fun, I want to just touch briefly on some of the other features and attack vectors that the bad guy can use, and how CyberArk could potentially help protect those endpoints and workstations. And when I say workstation, it could be a server as well, from that perspective. In addition to the ransomware protection, we have credential theft protection, just-in-time access, which speaks to what Chris mentioned, giving least privilege on the machine, but doing it in such a way that your worker can continue on unobstructed from his day-to-day tasks and not even realize that he's working off of least privilege. Everything works the way that it should, but he's not able to do anything that he shouldn't, as well as if an attacker was able to get foothold. And finally, we have some privilege deception, some honeypots that we can put on the workstation very easily, so that you can get alerted when the attack starts. If any of this sounds exciting to you guys, I definitely want to just plug really quickly. We have a great hands-on workshop around our Endpoint Privilege Manager. We do it once or twice a month, and we can definitely have that registered for you guys so you can have the hands-on experience and see exactly what that looks like. Now we'll move on to the ransomware protection and how we've developed this within the Endpoint Privilege Manager solution and how it can help you protect your assets out there. We have a very awesome organization within CyberArk, our CyberArk Labs, and they are testing ransomware and different types of malware regularly to see how we can protect these workstations. They do something close to 2,000 samples a day. And they are proud to brag with 100% success rate. So with the Endpoint Privilege Manager on these workstations, they can take advantage of that and block all the different ransomware varieties that are out there. And we're now somewhere over, well, at the time when we wrote this slide, it was 2 million that we can protect against. We took the screenshot, it was 2.6 million. And Chris has the inside info of where we are now.
Yeah, it's pretty close to 3 million. So just this year, 2020 alone, the amount of ransomware attacks that we are testing daily is just outstanding. It's unbelievable to me. Obviously, it's scripted. I don't think we're testing, thousands of ransomware samples every single day by hand, but it's pretty significant to kind of watch this number grow.
Yeah, a lot of great automation in play here, of course. So thanks for that insight, Chris. With that, let's get our hands dirty. I'm a visual person, as I'm sure are a lot of the people on the call. So let's see what this is going to look like in a day-to-day scenario from a regular worker standpoint. So here we have my server. It's just a regular workstation. We're going to pretend that that I am John for this scenario, and John is just doing his regular day-to-day work. He has his personal folder here with a few files. Unfortunately, we haven't taught him quite yet that he shouldn't be storing credentials in his files, but he likes to access things quickly, and he feels that this is the best way to get the credentials he needs when he needs them. While he's doing his work, he just gets an email, and this could be that he's rushing in between meetings, or he hasn't had his cup of coffee quite yet in the morning. But he says, okay, yep, this looks like a legitimate, and I have some instructions here about a training I'll be doing. Let me go ahead and click this. When he does that, we're going to see that the spreadsheet does open as we expect, but we're going to have a little bit of a heart sink in the chest and see that he's received a message that he has been attacked by ransomware. Not what he wants to see. Tells him to check his personal folder, so he quickly closes out of that attack and jumps to that personal folder, and he's scared to see that all these files are gone, and he stores credentials in there. So now he's not going to be able to get access to systems, or he doesn't have access to that presentation that he needed for his boss later in the day. And there's a mysterious file here as well. And when he takes a look at that, we see that that his files have been encrypted by a Shiva variant, and he's going to have to send some Bitcoins over or kiss his files goodbye. So he's pretty scared, and he's out in the water now, stuck out dry, not sure what to do next, and he doesn't want to have to pay. So worst case scenario, of course, we hear about this on the news all the time. Ransomwares are attacking. Heard on the news that the FBI put out a warning for healthcare. So it's definitely something that we're seeing more and more. And we have to think, how can we protect ourselves from this? And CyberArk wants to offer our solution and discuss how we can see and utilize our product to do that exactly. So first, I'm going to just have to ask you to hold on while I reverse this out. Luckily, I chose to click on the bad link, and I know how to reverse this, and I'm going to just decrypt my files. And here's our Shiva decryptor with my code. And there we go, files decrypted. Go ahead and close out here, and we'll check my documents to make sure that is indeed the case. And sure enough, my files are back to normal. The scary little message about Bitcoins is gone, and I am ready to protect myself. So now we're going to jump into the CyberArk EPM console and see how we can quickly and easily block this from happening in the future. We are using single sign-on to access these administrative type applications. So we simply click on our EPM icon in our SSO solution, Idaptive, and I'm prompted to authenticate myself. It can be hard to type and talk, so I think I got a typo in there twice. There we go. And we have multi-factor for best practices, of course. So let me authenticate myself with my MFA agent here. We are approved, and I will be automatically logged into our CyberArk EPM console. Next, we are going to look at our workstation group. So we can break this out to different groups, workstation, servers. I'm going to have to go through this pretty quick for you guys because we want to just demonstrate this particular item. But again, we're open to questions or our test case, our workshop for you in the future, so you can see all this stuff in detail. This is an out-of-the-box default policy, so there's nothing special that needs to be configured. We simply will come to default policies and take a look at application control. Currently, I am in the detect mode, and so we've alerted that encryption took place, but we didn't block it. But I definitely want to block these in the future now that I know how disruptive it can be. So I changed this to restrict, and my option will change for ransomware momentarily to restrict as well. There we go, nice green checkbox. and protect against ransomware is now on restrict. So I am all done in my console. So I will minimize out of this and go back to my desktop. The final magic trick I do need to do for the demonstration is, rather than wait on the policy to come down, which it would automatically do, I'll be forcing that so that it comes immediately. And there we go. I have a nice little pop-up telling me that my latest policies have been loaded. So we'll now do Groundhog Day and jump back into my email and fall for this trick all over again. So we click on the instructions. Our spreadsheet is going to open up. I am receiving the attacker message, but I also have received a restricted access from CyberArk EPM stating that it has restricted the Shiva app. And so I'll describe that a little bit more in just a second, but let's jump in and take a look at my personal folder. And all my files are intact. I do have the threat from the attacker still here, but all my files have been preserved and not encrypted from this. So kind of unpackaging this a little bit, is the CyberArk application policy we enabled essentially is allowing an unknown application to run in a sandbox. This will allow us to see what it's doing, but we won't let it access any processes or applications that it shouldn't. So when it tried to reach out and encrypt those files or access a file share, we blocked that attempt and said this isn't something that this spreadsheet should be doing, and it prevented it from encrypting those files. So I'll pause for a second before we pivot. Chris, anything that that you'd like to add in there?
No, I think it's really important to kind of better understand how ransomware works in general, right? I think that you know, testing 4,000, 2,000, 3,000, whatever ransomware samples every single day, they all act the exact same way. It's almost impossible to be able to come up with a list of, you know, ransomwares to block from, you know, actually executing. But if we can stop the capability of it trying to do what it's wanting to do, which is, you know, access to file types, you can block anything. And that's, I think, the goal is to stop access from things that aren't approved, like Microsoft Word or PowerPoint. And let's just concentrate on allowing those applications to access those file types, but nothing else. And we can come up with a very easy way of blocking ransomware from having access to those file types. So it's really important to understand ransomware is not something that you can block because a new one comes out every single day, but it is possible to block those new ransomwares and anything else from accessing your sensitive file types.
Thanks, Chris. And you let me have a sip of water there while you were talking, which was much needed. So let's do a quick pivot here, and let's look at this from the remote vendor perspective. And so this introduces an interesting scenario for organizations. And you have laptops and workstations that are outside your network. They're outside of that firewall and IDS. You don't know what is installed on the system. So why is an unknown software state an issue? Well, if you're allowing them into your network and they have these viruses and things like that on there, they are going to be able to transfer that from an attacker standpoint into your environment. We're going to very quickly go through a typical login scenario for a vendor, and it starts with VPN access. I think most of us are familiar with that. There's a lot of back-end work that can happen from that standpoint. You need to provision the Active Directory. You need to provision the VPN rights, and then there's going to be some support desk help as well, because inevitably installing the VPN or some other application that's needed on the vendor's machine is going to give you trouble, and you're going to need to help those outside vendors get that software installed. And the big thing is, once you've allowed them in your network, you've also allowed an attacker in your network if they're able to compromise that machine. So once the attackers compromise the vendor's machine and the vendor is on the VPN, they have the keys to the different pieces in your network. You might have some firewall rules in place or additional security that will try to restrict where that vendor is able to go. but they have an identity with Active Directory credentials in that network, and they can start attacking the different pieces there. I have a very quick analogy on that as a dog owner. When I have somebody come walk my dog, when I used to be able to travel still, I would have to give them a key or a digital key to get in my house, and then I trust that they're picking up my dog, and and then they're going to go for the walk. But I'm not trusting that they're going to go into my fridge and take my leftovers or sleep in my bed like Goldilocks or something like that, right? And so that's my analogy here with the VPN access is you're hoping that they're going to do just what they're supposed to do, but it's not necessarily going to stop them from trying to get other places, and it gives the attacker with his bad guy hoodie the opportunity to do that as well. So now let's jump into another visual technical demo, which I think you guys will like a lot, which is how we propose that you can provide a vendor or an outside employee that doesn't have AD identity or AD credentials access into your CyberArk solution to do what they need to do in a timely fashion without even needing a password. And you might say, without a password, how are we going to do that? So let me toggle over to a web browser, and here we go. And so I'll just have to have you trust that it took about 5 minutes for me to invite and register my vendor, John, to have access to my CyberArk environment. So that 5-minute process has already taken place, and now he's ready to log in and do his job. He'll start by simply navigating to portal.alero.io, which is publicly available. And at that point, he's going to launch his Alero application, or she. And the Alero application is available in the Android store and the iTunes App Store. And simply at that point, with the registration, they will launch the Alero application. And I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like here. That's what I'm multitasking with. There's my dog I was talking about, my smartphone. I have the Alero application, and I'm greeted with biometric authentication. Not a password, don't need to remember, don't need to share that Active Directory password to the vendor so they can log in. They simply are going to use the biometrics, either face or fingerprint, that's built into the phone operating system to authenticate themselves, and then they are able to scan the QR code. Once they have done that, they are authenticated and have access to the CyberArk environment. I'm Mike Bycat, so my environment is called Bycat, and I simply will click on that. There's a lot more to this that I'm breezing through, so please feel free to ask questions. But I will point out that if you are a CyberArk user, you'll notice we went right through the authentication screen. Alero knows who I was based on that biometric authentication, so no password was needed, and I am logged into my CyberArk solution. At this point, because of some role-based access controls that we utilize in CyberArk, I can only see the accounts that are stored here that are meant for me as a vendor. You see they're all called vendor accounts. I don't see all the internal accounts that I have no reason to see. And let's say that I want to do a Linux SSH session. I'll simply click connect. I can then see that a new browser will open up, and I will have my SSH session with recording. We also do this on the Windows side, which, to be honest, I was actually wanting to show you. So I'm going to backtrack real quick and do a Windows connection. We're going to connect as the vendor to our Windows domain. I'll click on the connect button once more. I'll choose my domain controller, and we're going to say that John needed to log in here to do some work in DNS Administrator. So we now have our new tab. It's giving us a secure session into the environment to the domain controller. No application is installed on the workstation of the vendor, so you don't have to worry about that side of things. You don't have to worry about the VPN provisioning, and here I am. And the really cool part that I'm going to show you now is how we tie this in with the endpoint privilege management solution to protect the server piece and bring it all home together. So the remote vendor plus EPM protection is that John needed to do his DNS work. So on the toolbar down here, we have our DNS manager. He's going to launch that, and he's going to be directed here that we're launching this with elevated privileges. He's approved to do this based on permissions in place. And here he is. He has full access to do what he needs to do. Maybe he needs to add a new zone or edit one of these DNS entries. But say John was feeling adventurous and decided he wanted to start snooping around and have a little bit more access to the server than we deemed that he should. He sees that registry edit has a shortcut here already, and he says, let's just kind of see what's going on here and see if I can make some group policy changes via regedit. And we are greeted with a block sign telling us that, hey, you're not allowed to do this. And so we've really built a great story here of providing passwordless, VPN-less authentication into CyberArk for your vendors, and then tying it all together with our EPM product to secure these workstations and prevent any escalation taking place from here. So with that, I'm going to pause and pass that back over to Chris to pick up our story from here. And please chat in the questions, and I'm happy to answer any.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. And the other cool thing to note is that when those users are connecting and doing those things, all that data and those that metadata of the activities that are happening are captured just like any other privileged user would be inside of CyberArk. So it's cool that we can go to an audit trail and we can see exactly what they did. So we can scan for a specific type of user, being the Alero users, or a specific company, vendor company that is accessing via Alero. And we get that same level of detail for all the things that they're doing in those remote sessions. So just to kind of recap on that, so what Mike did there was that he connected to the Alero portal, the CyberArk portal, without having to have a password. All he has is his mobile phone. And we've authenticated the person twice, once to open the phone, and then secondly, to actually open the application of the phone. That is the Alero app. And then obviously from there, they're able to get into the portal, which doesn't require a password again, and then click on the button that allows that person to log into CyberArk with, again, not a password, and then get all the way to the target system without having to have an actual password, which is huge because it lowers the amount of provisioning that are needed for these vendors. It is considered just in time to a lot of people because I can give Mike access, access to a target system for 30 minutes if I wanted to, or 5 days. And at the end of that 5 days, his access is then cut off and his time frame has then expired, which he will go into deactivated state, which is very kind of nice. So you don't have to have static vendor accounts just kind of sitting there, not being utilized, taking up licensing for VPN and for MFA tools and things on those lines. And this really will kind of streamline that. So great job. And again, if you do have questions, you can please feel free to put them into the QA and chat or the chat field. We'll monitor both. And we'll get to the kind of the second part of our presentation here. So I'm going to share my screen out really quick, and we're going to talk about a little bit more on that, right? Where Mike was showing that this vendor had access to a domain controller and had access to manage DNS. Now, we know a lot of companies that do something very similar to this or this exact thing, where they're providers of service and they're providers of these information security teams. I mean, there's a lot of outsourcing happening these days, and that is considered to be a privilege to be able to do that. And so privileges being everywhere, which could be, as you see at the bottom left-hand corner, workplaces are in the office, those that are fortunate enough to be able to go to an office. I think some of us maybe have taken that for granted. I know that I did. Being able to go to an office and see my coworkers every single day, but working from home, temporary locations, third-party vendors, these are all people that are working in different workplaces, and we want to give them the access that they need, but we need to be able to provide it in a manner that is secure. And so CyberArk is moving into a kind of a new age of identity security and being able to kind of tie into the new age where the perimeter has changed. We're no longer protected by our corporate walls and intrusion detection systems and firewalls and things on those lines, that we've had stories from time to time after COVID hit, where I was talking to companies all over the world, and they were saying that, yeah, they had no choice but to tell their employees to come in, grab their desktop, grab their monitor, their keyboard, their mouse, their power strips in some cases, and even Ethernet cables, which was mind-blowing to me on one occasion, where they had to plug it in right to their router at home. And so if you can imagine a workstation that is directly connected to the internet without any intrusion detection systems, without any firewalls, blocking access to that workstation becomes very, very difficult. And so identity security is a way for us to be able to say that every ID, every person has some sort of privilege. And because those privileged identities are expanding into all these different workforces, we want to figure out a way to make it as secure as possible, but also as seamless as possible, and be able to provide a technology that allows the adoption to be as easy as possible for all of these users. And so we acquired a company to kind of get a jump start on this, and then we're going to kind of modify and tweak and advance and evolve a lot of the technology that kind of comes along with it. But CyberArk has always been talking about single sign-on and multi-factor authentication for decades. But now we have our own solution to be able to do that and expand on it. So it's not just, hey, MFA into this password vault web access portal. Let's now consider that maybe the web portal isn't being used and they're going direct to systems. When do we prompt for MFA? When can we prompt you for MFA and then maybe deliver you into a session with a shared account so you don't have to own that privilege? We understand that companies are moving to multi-directories, so having multi-directory support is obviously going to be crucial, from Azure Active Directory to on-prem Active Directory to even Google identity and access management. And then there's all of these things that kind of tie into user behavioral analytics and being able to understand that, yes, I don't want to have to prompt somebody for MFA every single time that they try to do something. You're going to make somebody really angry. Because they have to pull out their phone or they have to use their fingerprint on something or whatever. Let's provide MFA prompts when it's the right time. Let's make sure that they have the option, if necessary, to prompt for MFA if the risk is high enough. And then kind of identifying lifecycle management to be able to provide access to somebody whenever they need it, but then take it away if it's not needed, all the way into mobile device management and being able to understand that this device, just like Mike saw, or you saw that Mike did, that's a privileged device. And we want to make sure that Alero app and CyberArk app and even the CyberArk Idaptive app is protected and it's being managed by the organization. So I just want to take a quick dive right into the interface. So what we can see here is when I authenticate myself and multi-factor authenticate myself, I'm able to gain access to really every app that I have been given access to, whether it's Jenkins, for instance. So if I'm a DevOps engineer, I can, I can get in and I can get connected to my Jenkins instance and I can do everything that I need to do from there, right? It's just an IDP being able to provide us access to those different environments. But let's say, for example, somebody needs to be able to reset their AD password. Yeah, let's prompt them for a couple versions of authentication. Maybe it's their phone, maybe it's a YubiKey, or maybe it's an email or a phone call or some security questions. And let's be able to manage our account password from there. So we can always allow someone to be able to have some self-service password reset if necessary, which is very cool. But then also being able to identify where someone may need some extra authentication steps. So for instance, if I need to get over to AWS, I can prompt that person for multiple layers of authentication. Maybe it's 2 steps, maybe it's not, one is just not enough. But if I get over to AWS, I can then do whatever it is that I need to do. So here you can see an MFA prompt and voila, I'm in there and I'm trying to do other things. But this goes for a lot of different application types. Obviously being able to have different authentication factors to to kind of dive into where it makes every user, their jobs as easy as possible. I know I love my fingerprint reader on my workstation, and being able to use that as a two-factor authentication method is super efficient and super helpful. So being able to tie to that in. There's a ton of different things that we can do with CyberArk Idaptive, and being able to control who has access to what and at what level is something that's pretty massive. Now, I'm going to use this AWS example again. And when I do this, what's going to happen is that what you'll see is after I authenticated myself, as you saw before, it prompted me for several different roles. Now, this is saying that utilize CyberArk Idaptive to give me a choice to log into AWS with, let's say, an administrative account. So this gets me into AWS, and I've now just used a federated login. So it's using SAML to authenticate into AWS. And now I have admin access to this AWS account. Now, the bits about that is do I really need administrative access to AWS, right? And this is where we're going to transition into the securing modern cloud workloads end of the presentation. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to take you guys through the last phase of our presentation here. So I'm going to introduce you the new Cloud Entitlements Manager from CyberArk. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, this is something that is actually going to GA on November the 9th. There is a launch that you can actually register for if you would like to see some of the keynotes and some of the presentations. But I'm going to walk you through just kind of briefly what Cloud Entitlements Manager is solving and what this service is going to provide. So as you saw at the beginning of the call, from a least privilege perspective, Mike went through, how do we enforce least privilege so that users can do what they need to do, but not have excessive permissions? And that excessive permission problem extends itself into the cloud. And that's a huge point, because there's a big challenge. Whether you're dealing with Windows or Unix or a database or really anything, it extends into the cloud. And that challenge is that a lot of organizations are just saying, let's do allow all because it just makes things easier, right? Let's give them local administrator rights on their laptop because they need to be able to install things or work from home or change their time zone or add new different Wi-Fis and things like that. And users are just going to always request more permissions than they actually need because they don't know the direct and very precise permissions that they actually need. And that makes things really detailed and complex. Now, this isn't something new to the cloud, right? It's just something that we've been kind of newly focusing on, because at the end of October, AWS will more than likely hit 7,300 permissions. This number, the first number, the Azure, is actually a little bit older. And so I think they're over 8,000 now if you add in Azure Active Directory and the on-prem synchronization. And then Google Cloud has over 3,200 permissions that are possible. That's literally saying I have 7,300 dials that I need to decide whether or not somebody actually needs in their access to AWS. And these Cloud IAM services, they're not doing anything to enforce it. Like, for instance, if I were to say, as a Microsoft administrator, I'm going to give you and everybody in the organization domain admin rights. There's nothing that Microsoft is going to do to say, no, you can't do that, or automatically strip people out of that domain admin group. Just like in the cloud services, is that with AWS or Azure or GCP, I can give you administrator access without even having to worry about whether or not somebody's going to strip it away from me. That's not something that is enforced. So this presents itself as a big problem, because with misconfigurations on a lot of different types of attacks, we can actually see that with a recent breach, an attacker had access to a misconfiguration of a firewall, which gave that person access to an AWS instance. Now, inside of that AWS EC2 instance, there was a role permission that was misconfigured that allowed that attacker to have two very, very privileged commands. Number one was list bucket, and that was a role and a permission that allowed that attacker to be able to see every single S3 bucket that was there. And then the deciding dagger, which was the sync bucket command, that was used for at least 7 months to extract data out of that S3 buckets into GitHub. And that's how that attack went down. And it lasted for 7 months. It's still shocking to me to hear that attacks can still last that long from lessons that we've learned in the past few years, 4 or 5 years now. We've learned that these attacks can run that long. So what can we do about it, right? So we need to be able to detect on an alert on excessive permissions and utilize a policy generator that's going to provide the right permissions to be able to say, yes, Mr. Internal User, and even potentially remote vendor, you can do all of these things, but we're going to prevent you from having access to that S3 bucket because you shouldn't have had access to it from begin with. And so essentially securing these modern workloads is going to provide us the ability to utilize this new tool to be able to provide a service that is a complete SaaS offering from CyberArk. So essentially, this is like I said, it's a preview look at Cloud Entitlements Manager. So right from the main screen, we can see valid information, and this is very informative information. The size of these bubbles represents the size of an AWS account, Azure account, GCP account. I can zoom in on AWS as a grouping, right? The color tells us that there's a medium level of exposure. If it was a lesser level of exposure, it would change to a tan color. If it was more exposed or the risk level was a lot higher, it would change to a darker shade of orange. You can see that each one of these accounts has an exposure level of a certain percentage. And what does that mean? Let's take a look. So if we zoom in on that one account, I could see this workspace is this D1 account. And if I zoom in on one of these accounts or roles or groups, I can see an exposure level of, for instance, this S3 bucket access group role, has 60%. And what that means is that based upon a permission type to a target resource and then some other outlining factors, it's going to give you a resource exposure level. And in this case, it's 60%. So let's look at a user's account just for instance. And then in this case, that's Robert. So I can see Robert here is my identity. And then I can look for different services. And in this case, I can see EC2, and he has access to everything, right? And then I can also look and see other resources. So here you can see an example of S3 and how Robert has access, to different resources inside of that main target resource. And what I'm looking for is that S3 bucket. And there you can see the CEM bucket 1, Robert has access to it. Now, if I click on it, I can see used permissions. So Robert's not doing anything in that S3 bucket. I've got a lot of unused permissions and a lot of unknown, meaning I don't know if he's used them or not, but I do know that he hasn't touched it. So this right here lends itself to being an excessive permission. So what does CyberArk do to be able to provide access around it? I can say, well, let's go to that S3 bucket role, and then I can go to recommendations, and then very simply just click create fix. Now it's giving me a 2-step process. The last step in this is to be able to say, hey, I need to remove these 2 managed policies. They're the ones that are providing the level of excessive permissions that person doesn't need. But the first step is, let's attach a new policy that you can see here as a new inline policy. So I can click here. It takes me right to the section and right to the role that is defined in AWS. You can see the 2 associated policies here. I can click add inline policy. And instead of going through and choosing every single dial of those 7,300 permissions, I can go to my JSON tab here, delete this out, paste in the new JSON, which comes from Cloud Entitlements Manager, click review policy, and voila, now I've got this brand new policy that is direct for this simple role, and it's giving the right permissions. So it's allowing 4 out of the 241 services that are inside of AWS, but I can now remove these other 2, and the role would remain seamless as far as its access is concerned, because essentially it's providing the access that is necessary and trimming off all of the excess. So this is something, like I said, that is new, that is coming out on November the 9th. We're very excited about this and looking at privilege from a different angle and providing least privilege recommendations for all of our users across these cloud platforms. So Again, just to quickly summarize, Mike and I went through talking about the right privilege and making sure that we're protecting against ransomware and we're providing the right level of privilege to the right users, and that is extending into the remote vendors functionality, because we cannot guarantee that the posture of their security programs are the same as everybody else's that is on this call today, and then some, right? We want to make sure that we can provide them the access that they need, but prevent them from being able to access the things that they don't. Now, we also have to consider that privileges could be anywhere, including business users having access to Twitter account or Facebook accounts or Expensify admins, or my favorite is my payroll administrator. Having administrative access to the payroll system is pretty big, because we all remember the movie Office Space and being able to take out those fractions of a penny. I don't want my fractions gone. I know that everybody else on this call probably doesn't either. And then wrapping it up with securing the modern cloud workloads and being able to protect the privileges that these administrators or every user that logs into AWS, Azure, GCP, and then some, and protecting what they can and cannot do. So on behalf of Mike and myself, I want to thank everybody for taking the time out on this very new platform that we've used for this event this year. I've been every single year, I think, for the past 7 or 8 years in the InfoSecCon, ever since Rob asked me to come to the McKimmon Center in Raleigh at NC State and do some presentations there and have a booth and everything else. So we really appreciate you guys taking out your time of your day to spend it with us to learn a little bit about come and knock on my door. We had a lot of fun creating that slide and that abstract. So again, if there are any questions, please feel free to follow up with us. We've got a couple great representatives on this call that listened in, Brooke and Deb. They are our representatives for the Carolinas, and they'll be more than happy to take your questions, set up a call with whatever it is that you guys might need. So I think that about wraps it up. Thanks for your time today. Mike, awesome job, my friend. It was good to see you. Have a great weekend. Chris. Enjoy. Hopefully everybody doesn't lose power any more than we already have. So thanks a lot. Thanks from CyberArk. Thanks for the time. Take care.
See you guys.
Bye.